USS Vincennes was a United States Navy New Orleans-class cruiser, sunk at the Battle of Savo Island in 1942. She was the second ship to bear the name. She was laid down on the 2nd of January 1934 at Quincy, Massachusetts, by the Bethlehem Shipbuilding Company's Fall River plant, launched on the 21st of May 1936, sponsored by Miss Harriet Virginia Kimmel, and commissioned on the 24th of February 1937. Captain Burton H. Green in command. The New Orleans-class cruisers were the last U.S. cruisers built to the specifications and standards of the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922. Such ships, with a limit of 10,000 tons standard displacement and 8-inch caliber main guns, may be referred to as treaty cruisers. Originally classified a light cruiser when she was authorized because of her thin armor, she was reclassified a heavy cruiser because of her 8-inch guns. The term heavy cruiser was not defined until the London Naval Treaty in 1930. This ship and Quincy were a slightly improved version of the New Orleans-class design. Interwar period. The new cruiser departed from Boston on the 19th of April 1937 for her shakedown cruise, which took her to Stockholm, Sweden, Helsinki, Finland, Le Havre, France, and Portsmouth, England. Early in January 1938, Vincennes was assigned to Cruiser Division 7 Scouting Force and steamed through the Panama Canal to San Diego, California. In March, the ship participated in Fleet Problem 19 in the Hawaiian area before returning to San Pedro, California for operations off the West Coast for the remainder of the year. Following an overhaul at the Mare Island Navy Yard which lasted through April 1939, the cruiser returned east, transited the Panama Canal on the 6th of June, in company with Quincy, Tuscaloosa, and San Francisco, and anchored in Hampton Roads on the 13th. For the next 2 months, she operated out of Norfolk in the vicinity of the Chesapeake Lightship and the Southern Drill Grounds. On the 1st of September 1939, the day on which Adolf Hitler's legions marched into Poland and commenced hostilities in Europe, Vincennes lay at anchor off Tompkinsville, New York. She then began conducting neutrality patrols off the East Coast, ranging into the Caribbean Sea and the Yucatan Channel, and continued these duties through the spring of 1940. Late in May, as German troops were smashing Allied defenses in France, Vincennes steamed to the Azores and visited Ponta Delgada from 4 to 6 June 1940 before she proceeded on for French Morocco to load a shipment of gold for transport to the United States. She was delayed in the Azores for 3 days while her code machine was repaired by Louis Lee Edwards, an enlisted sailor. For his actions, Edwards was offered a commission as an officer. While at anchor at Casablanca, the ship received word of Italy's declaration of war upon France. The stab in the back, condemned by President Franklin Roosevelt soon thereafter. Vincennes' commanding officer, Captain John R. Beardle, noted subsequently in his official report of the cruise that it was apparent that the French bitterly resented this and despised Italy for her actions. Quote, after departing North African waters on the 10th of June, the cruiser returned to the United States to offload her precious metallic cargo and return to the drudgery of neutrality patrols, overhauling at Norfolk Navy Yard, Portsmouth, Virginia. Into the first week of January 1941, Vincennes departed Hampton Roads on the 7th of January, in company with Wichita, New York, and Texas Texas, bound for Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Operating once again in the Caribbean, the heavy cruiser fired battle practice and gunnery exercises in company with Wichita through the 18th of January, when the two cruisers proceeded for Portland Bight, Jamaica, conducting neutrality patrols from this port. Vincennes patrolled in company with other ships safeguarding neutral waters and America's recently acquired Caribbean bases. Vincennes joined other fleet units for landing exercises at Culebra, Puerto Rico on the 4th of February 1941 and sent her 50-feet boats to assist in unloading and troop debarkation drills. She assisted transports Macaulay and Wharton in landing men and material before taking station with Fire Support Group 2. The cruiser then fired simulated gunfire support operations with her main and secondary batteries in exercises which foreshadowed her future combat role in the South Pacific. For the remainder of February, the ship continued her landing support operations with Transport Divisions 2 and 7, anchoring on occasion at Guadalcanal, Puerto Rico. Conducting operations out of Puerto Rican waters, Vincennes called at Pernambuco, Brazil, on the 17th of March and got underway for Cape Town, South Africa, on the 20th, arriving to a warm welcome 9 days later. The ship took on a large shipment of gold bullion to pay for arms purchased in the United States by the United Kingdom and then headed home on the 30th. En route to New York, she conducted exercises. After a brief post-voyage period of repairs, the heavy cruiser sailed from the Virginia Capes, where she rendezvoused with Ranger and Sampson, proceeded on to Bermuda, and dropped anchor in Grassy Bay on the 30th of April. She patrolled in the Caribbean and off the Atlantic coast of the United States through June. After continuing her duties with the Neutrality Patrol into the autumn, as American naval forces in the North Atlantic found themselves engaged in a de facto war with Germany, Vincennes undertook another mission to South African waters. She left the East Coast late in November with convoy WS-12 American transports carrying British troops. On the 7th of December 1941, the cruiser fought its way through heavy seas. Walls of water mercilessly pounded the ships of the convoy, and waves battered Vincennes, smashing a motor whaleboat to pieces and ripping a Sock Seagull floatplane from its moorings on the storm-lashed well-deck amidships. The plane was battered against the catapult silos into the hangar doors before it was swept over the ship's side. By that evening, however, the ship learned that she was not only at war with the elements but with Japan as well. Japanese naval air forces had struck Pearl Harbor and plunged the United States into war. World War II. After having safely convoyed her charges to Cape Town, where she arrived on the 9th of December, Vincennes departed South African waters on the 16th, bound via Trinidad for Hampton Roads. Following her arrival at Norfolk on the 4th of January 1942, she shifted to New York 4 days later to be outfitted for war. Late in the month, she joined Hornet as the carrier conducted her shakedown training off the east coast of the United States. Vincennes sailed from New York on the 4th of March, bound for the Pacific. She transited the Panama Canal on the 11th of March and proceeded to San Francisco. Doolittle Raid, the heavy cruiser, now a part of TF-18, built around Hornet, departed San Francisco on the 2nd of April. The carrier bore a strange deck carguard, 16 Army B-25 Mitchell medium bombers slated to strike at Japan's heart. TF-18 rendezvoused with TF-16, built around Enterprise, and with the combined might of the two task forces, struck out westward across the Pacific, headed toward Japanese home waters. On the morning of the 18th of April, when the American warships were still some 150 miles from the planned launch point, an unexpected hitch developed. Japanese trawlers sighted and reported the task force. Vice Admiral William Halsey decided to fly off the bombers immediately. Accordingly, all 16 of the heavily loaded Mitchells, laden with bombs and extra fuel, rose from Hornet's spray-slicked flight deck and climbed unsteadily into the leaden-gray skies. Although the raid inflicted only minimal materiel damage upon the Japanese homeland, it nevertheless packed a powerful morale-building punch. When queried as to the base from whence the bombers had come, President Roosevelt said, "From Shangri-La." The combined Enterprise and Hornet task force retired eastward and made Pearl Harbor on the 25th of April. Departing again 5 days later, the ships, still screened by Vincennes, bent on speed toward the Coral Sea. However, they were too late to take part in the Battle of the Coral Sea, Battle of Midway. Vincennes' task force returned to Pearl Harbor on the 26th of May but got underway again on the 29th, bound for waters off Midway Island, which, according to American intelligence reports, a Japanese invasion force was approaching. By the 4th of June, the heavy cruiser had joined TF-16 and was steaming north of Midway. After American air attacks had crippled 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, the Vincennes, together with the cruiser Pensacola and destroyers Benham and Balch, was sent over to TF-17 to reinforce the carrier Yorktown after it had suffered damage in a dive-bombing attack. At 1640, a group of Nakajima B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers from Hiryu approached from the north. TF-17's radar soon picked them up 15 miles out, and Yorktown launched planes to intercept as her screen deployed to bring an optimum concentration of anti-aircraft fire to bear upon the approaching enemy. 3 minutes after the first plane was spotted, Grumman F-4F Wildcats from the carrier hit a Kate. The Japanese torpedo plane spiraled from the sky, trailing a long streamer of smoke before crashing into the sea. Vincennes opened fire at 1644 with her 5-in 25 cal 20mm and 1.1 in anti-aircraft batteries, increasing her speed to 25 knots and slowly turning to starboard. Vincennes kept her port guns trained on the enemy. While combing torpedo tracks, Vincennes hit a Kate, and it went into the sea 150 yards off her port bow. The sharp, bitter action ended as quickly as it had begun. The Japanese had been driven off, but at a high cost for the Americans. Yorktown, mortally hit and listing to port, slowed to a halt. Vincennes followed Storia around the carrier, screening from further air attacks. However, on the 6th of June, I-168 slipped through a screen of 6 destroyers and torpedoed Yorktown and Hammond, sinking the latter. The carrier went down early on the 7th. Returning to Pearl Harbor, Vincennes entered the Navy Yard for repairs and alterations which lasted until early July. She then conducted tactical exercises off the island of Hawaii with other ships of TF-11 before departing Hawaiian waters on the 14th of July to rendezvous with TF-16, 18, and 62. Guadalcanal campaign screening for Transport Squadron X-ray, slated to participate in the Guadalcanal landings. Vincennes, in company with San Juan and Quincy, joined TF-62 on the 26th of July. On the 27th, the cruiser conducted approach exercises for landing practice and simulated bombardment drills off Coral Island in the Fiji Group. As flagship for Task Group 62.3, Vincennes remained on station in the covering force in the transport area before undertaking further approach and landing exercise support drills. Following replenishing, the heavy cruiser formed up with the American Armada making its way to the Solomon Islands. Vincennes' Screening Transport Division (Yoke) arrived off Guadalcanal on the 7th of August. At daybreak, beneath overcast skies, the ship catapulted her scout planes and then unlimbered her main and secondary batteries to commence shore bombardment, while the thunder of the supporting ship's gunfire reverberated across the waters. Marines disembarked from the landing craft and stormed ashore to meet initially light resistance on the island. Shortly after 13:20, Japanese planes launched a counterstrike. To sunward of the transports, Vincennes found herself in a favorable position to combat the attack and track the opposing planes, being among the first ships to open fire on the attackers. Forced to jettison the deadly loads prematurely, the Japanese retired without doing any damage, but not before Vincennes had bagged two of them. After sunset, Vincennes, Quincy, and Astoria, in company with Helm and Jarvis, retired to conduct screening patrols. Returning to her covering duties at daylight, Vincennes arrived at Transport Area X-ray off Guadalcanal by daybreak. 2 minutes before noon, Japanese bombers intent on avenging the losses of the day before and disrupting the American landing, swooped down from Rabaul. 27 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers swept in a low-level torpedo attack and ran a gauntlet of gunfire from the transports and their escorting cruisers and destroyers. 3,000 yards from the transports, Vincennes, as in the previous day's action, was again in favorable firing position and opened up with every gun in her battery, from 18 to 20 mm, that could bear on the attackers. During the ensuing melee, the cruiser used her 18 guns effectively, helping to down at least 7 Betties, which flew at an altitude of only 25 to 50 feet. The shell splashes from the main battery caused Japanese pilots to fly into walls of water, forced them to drastically alter their approaches. Vincennes dodged one torpedo which passed beneath her stern and evaded a bomb which fell off her port quarter. Jarvis, adjacent to the cruiser, took one torpedo hit which ultimately proved fatal to the ship. Later, during the afternoon hours, aerial reconnaissance reported a Japanese surface force coming down from the base at Rabaul. These flights noted what was thought to be 3 Japanese cruisers, 3 destroyers and 2 gunboats, a seaplane tenders steaming south. While Jarvis limped away from Lunga Point, Vincennes and her sisters Quincy and Astoria steamed, as the northern escort force, to a position off Savo Island to screen the vulnerable transports which were still unloading off the invasion beaches. Captain Frederick Lewis Reef Cole of Vincennes assumed that the enemy ships reportedly en route from Rabaul were going to launch and support another air attack early the following morning. He accordingly issued orders to be especially vigilant during the midwatch and fully expected an air attack at daybreak. Loss at the Battle of Savo Island. At about midnight on the 8th of August, Reef Cole retired to his sea cabin, adjacent to the pilot house, after having been on the bridge continuously since 0445 that morning. Turning in at 0050 on the 9th of August, he left his ship in the hands of the executive officer, Commander W.E.A. Mullin. Nearly an hour later, at about 01:45, lookouts spotted flares and star shells to the southward, accompanied by the low rumble of gunfire. The sound of the general quarters alarm soon rang throughout the ship and stirred her to action. Vincennes lookouts were seeing the elimination of the Southern escort group based around HMAS Canberra and Chicago. Unbeknownst to the men manning the ships to the northward, a powerful enemy force was heading in the direction. 6 cruisers and 1 destroyer under the command of Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa had turned north and were steaming directly towards Vincennes and her 2 sisters. The first Japanese cruiser searchlight beams illuminated Vincennes shortly after 01:55, and the American cruiser opened fire with her main battery at the troublesome lights. Within a minute, however, Japanese shells bracketed the ship and Vincennes shuddered under the impact of Japanese 8-inch armor-piercing shells. The bridge, carpenter shop, battle 2, and radio antenna trunks all were hit by the first salvo. Altering course to port, RFK, who had come to the bridge at the alarm, rang down for increased speed. With the ship and internal communications disrupted, it is doubtful that the order was received. Still moving at 19.5 knots, the heavy cruiser reeled under the impact of another group of direct hits. Some of the shells in this group set fire to the volatile aircraft in Vincennes hangar space, and the resultant flames became uncontrollable. A direct hit knocked the aft anti-aircraft director overboard. At 02:00, Vincennes heeled to starboard in an attempt to evade enemy gunfire, only to be hit by Japanese torpedoes. 1 or 2 long lance torpedoes ripped into the ship's No. 4 firearm and put it out of action. In moments the report came, both engine rooms are black and dead, having lost power and all steering control. 5 minutes later, Vincennes was dead in the water within minutes. The glare of burning fires attracted additional incoming shells which quickly put the ship's own guns out of action. Vincennes shuddered to a halt. Hit at least 85 times by 8- and 5-inch shells, the ship gradually began to list. At 02:10, the Japanese retired, leaving Savo Island and the burning hulks of 3 American cruisers in the wakes. As Vincennes' list increased to port, his RFK issued the order to abandon ship at 02:30. Serviceable life jackets and rafts were broken out, and the crew began abandoning ship. At 02:40, the captain went down to the main deck and jumped into the tepid waters of what would come to be known as Iron Bottom Sound. 332 crewmen did not survive and are officially recorded as killed in action in the loss of the Vincennes. RFK subsequently wrote, "The magnificent Vincennes, which we were all so proud of, and which I had the honor to command since the 23rd of April 1941, rolled over and then sank at about 02:50 the 9th of August 1942, about 2.5 miles east of Savo Island, Solomon's Group, in some 500 fathoms of water." Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison later wrote that RFK, who had made about as many mistakes as a commanding officer could make, was broken in spirit by the loss of his ship. Awards. Vincennes earned 2 battle stars for her World War II service. Commanding officers: Captain Bertrand H. Green, February 1937 – January 1938. Captain Lemuel M. Stevens, January 1938 – July 1939. Captain John D. Beardle, July 1939 – April 1941.